it was a really tough one because I feel like, well, you guys will both know this. Like, I identified like as an athlete for so long. Like, that was who I was. Like, yes, I was a good student. I was a daughter. I was a friend. I was all these different things. But like, what you identify yourself with as like your exceptional talent is basketball. And that's like how you have identity, and that's how you have confidence and all those different things. And so when I removed myself from basketball in university, it was like this weird process of trying to figure out like who I was again, because you're kind of not special after that. Like, once you're not a varsity athlete or a starter on your high school team or college team, like, you're kind of just like everybody else. And that's like hard, when you've been not that for so long. So, but I do think, and, it's something that I look back on now that I wasn't sort of happy with at the time, but I look back on it now, and it actually forced me to figure out who I was without basketball very early on. And I think what that did was make the transition easier for me when I graduated university. So in my last year of school, I started thinking about the things that I wanted to do. And, sports was obviously still something I was really passionate about. And I was really interested in the music industry. So I started looking up people in Toronto and trying to figure out what my next step was going to be. I really felt like I had to be in Toronto to do those kind of jobs at the level that I wanted to do it. So I just sort of spent my entire fourth year of university hitting the pavement and just talking to different people. I went up there for my reading week and realized really quickly that no one was going to take me seriously unless I moved there. So I made the decision that I was going to move to Toronto right after I graduated. So I think we had our I don't even remember, but I think we had our graduation on May 3rd or something, and I was in Toronto by 2 days later. I was gone. And I literally moved 3 days after I graduated. And so I cut a deal with my parents. I said, let me, give me a month, pay my rent and pay my living expenses for a month, and let me see if I can get a job in sports. And if I didn't, by June, whatever it was, I was going to just get any job to pay the bills and then just, keep working my way. So I made a lot of good connections, hit up all of those when I got there, and I interviewed for a couple different jobs and ultimately ended up getting a job as an administrative assistant, which essentially is a secretary at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, which is the sports conglomerate that owns the Leafs, the Raptors, TFC, Scotiabank Arena, all that stuff. So I was nervous. The job was recommended to me by someone that I trusted, so I was excited, but it was also nervous because my impression of administrative assistants was people who have been secretaries for 30, 40 years, that was their calling, that was their life. And so when I was interviewing, the first question he asked me was do you want to be an administrative assistant for the rest of your life? And I was like, oh God, because the answer is no, but I'm also willing to do the work now. I wasn't above any kind of job. It wasn't something that I wanted to do long term. And so it turns out the person that I ended up working for used to take assistants and turn them over in a good way every 2-3 years. So he would train them and then he'd move them into other parts of his business. And so this is something he had already done a couple times. So he was like, great, I'm looking for someone that I can teach and then move into another part of the business. So I ended up working for him for 2 years, ended up being the best experience. I didn't do a lot of administrative assistant things. I did some of them, but for the most part, he really taught me about the business, and still to this day is what I would call a friend now, more so than a mentor. He went on to become the chief commercial officer at MLSE. Wow. Just really, really sharp. Yeah. Dave Hopkinson is his name. Really sharp business mind, well regarded in the industry. And now he actually moved over to Spain. He's at Real Madrid now, which is really, really cool. Yeah.
Nice.
So that was my first job in sports. And then I did a couple different things on the business side, and then ultimately ended up moving over to the basketball side to run our G League team, manage all the basketball operations side of our G League team. Did that for 2 seasons, won a championship in our second season, moved up to the Raptors, and then this will be my third season. This is my third season up with the Raptors in my current role.
Just quickly touching on what you said, were you lucky in terms of who you how the administrative, could you have been on somebody else's desk that wouldn't have been as help? Was that just luck of the draw kind of?
Yeah, totally luck of the draw. The job was recommended to me. Someone was you should apply for this, and I was administrative assistant, I'm not sure. She was trust me, just apply. And I was okay, cool. So I did have like someone tip me off, but I think that job when I applied, I have to go back and look at the records, but I think there was like 600 applicants just for an administrative job. Like MLSE jobs get crazy amount of applicants. So, for anything really. So, but yeah, it was, I did not know the situation that I was getting into. I knew someone had recommended and said the guy that you'd be working for is really unbelievable. He's great. But I definitely didn't have any indication that it was going to be how it ended up being. Like, he for sure is like one of the best people that has taught me so much, and still to this day is like an advocate for me, and is there whenever I need advice. Like, really, really just lucked out on that one for sure.
Did you have any idea that it was going to turn into what it did, or did you just? I mean, I know you said that administrative assistant, like I don't want to be here my entire life, but knowing MLS, did you know anything about the connection it would have to basketball?
Not really. Like, at the time, it was kind of interesting because, it's so different now with the sports industry than it was like when we were in school. Like, I knew about the sports industry, but because we lived in a city that didn't have pro teams, like I was into pro sports, but not really. Like, I was more into like AUS and CIS. Like, that's the stuff we watched, we tracked, like we talked about. So for me, like, I knew about the sports side, but I really wanted to work on the business side of sports. Like, that's what I had in my head. I took a business degree. I loved business. It was something I was passionate about and raised around. So I thought that would be really interesting. Not to say I obviously knew there were like GMs and coaches and a whole basketball operations team, but like nobody really talked about that at the time. That stuff is so much more in the media now, and we just have so much more access to like those types of things now. So not to say I didn't really realize it was an option, but I didn't think of it as an option. I was like, sports business. So when I got into the sports business side, and I, because I was working for someone higher up in the company, that meant I had relationships with other people who were, maybe other people maybe didn't have access to. So I was working with the Raptors and the Leafs side and their executives. And that's how I got to know Masai and Bobby and Teresa, because I was working for Dave. And so once I started seeing them, and I was like, they were like younger, my age, I got along with them really well. I actually hung out with them outside of work. They were sort of friends before I ended up working with them. And then I was like, you know what? And the one thing that I always felt was missing on the business side was like this connection to winning. So on the business side, like, of course you're connected to winning. You're funding the teams, you're creating atmosphere for the teams to play in. Like, you're really like, you can't have one without the other. But I really sort of miss like the nitty gritty of like having your hands on winning. And so once I started to get to know the people on the basketball side, I was like, yo, this actually seems like more of my thing. Because I was working on everything. I was working on Leafs, Raptors, soccer, music, everything. And not to say I didn't love those things, but obviously basketball was like my first love. So I was like, as I started to see that, I was like, you know what, this might be like a better fit for me, and just something that I maybe didn't think of. So I didn't go into it being like, oh, I want to work for the Raptors front office. But ultimately, that's what I decided, and that's where I ended up.
It's almost, go ahead, Tristan, if you want to.
I wasn't going to say anything.
I was going to say, it's almost like organically, like how you talked about at X, you lost your identity in a sense. And then kind of with the opportunity and the risks of moving to a new city and doing something that you weren't quite sure of, you almost just organically fell back into your identity.
It's so crazy. It really is crazy. Like, I didn't think about that at all.
It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. Like,
I know. It's so weird. It's like, and it's weird how it happened too, because so I did another stint with Dave. So I worked for him, moved into another part of his business, working in the foundation side, and some things changed from a leadership level. And I actually went back to work with him when he got promoted for about 1.5 years. And so it was a temporary thing, he knew, but it was to help him transition to sort of like this next level. And as we were talking, we were kind of coming to the end of that temporary time, and him and I were talking about what I wanted to do next. And I had said, like, I actually think I really want to do something on the basketball side. And he was like, are you sure? Like, that's you get into a whole other ball game when you move over to that side. Like, it's a lot more tumultuous, the ups and downs of winning and losing. Like, the business environment is a more stable environment, for lack of a better word. And so, we talked it through, and I was like, I think I want to do it. Like, I think I can do it. And so we hadn't talked to Masai about it yet, because we were in the playoffs and against Washington. So we were going to wait until it wound down, and then I was going to go over and have a talk with the basketball side and just sort of voice to them, if there was anything over there for me. Like, I wasn't sure. And we were in Washington for the playoffs, and I was hosting, Dave was doing a trip, like a business trip, and hosting a bunch of our partners, and I was essentially running the trip for him because I was his assistant. And I got a phone call from Masai, like randomly, and he was like, hey, can you come to our hotel? Because we were at a different hotel. I was like, yeah, I can be there in like 10 minutes. He's like, cool. So I walked over, and he basically was like, I know you're coming to the end of your time with Dave. Would you want to come run our G League team? And like, I hadn't even gotten a chance to go talk to him yet. It was like, and I was going to, but he just like, all of it just like came out of nowhere. And I was like, and I literally looked at him, I was like, did Hop say something to you? He's like, no, what are you talking about? And I was like, yo, like the universe works in like, I don't want to sound too hippie, but the universe works in weird ways.
Thanks for tuning in to TOTFC Podcast. If you liked it and you want to hear more, please share it with a friend, a family member, a teammate, or anybody. Like the video, consider subscribing to TOTFC Podcast.